I died. And what I saw on the other side changed everything. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. Nothing seemed out of place. But then, in an instant, everything went dark. I felt my body grow heavy, like I was sinking into something vast and endless. At first there was silence, a silence so deep, so absolute that it was terrifying. Then slowly I became aware of something strange. I was still conscious. I could think, I could feel, but I was no longer inside my body. I looked down and saw myself lying there, motionless. People were shouting, trying to wake me up, but I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. And then it happened. A force, something unseen yet immensely powerful, pulled me upward. It wasn't like floating. It was like being dragged into the unknown. I expected to see a tunnel of light. That's what people always describe, right? A bright passage, a sense of peace. But no, that's not what happened. Instead, I was surrounded by darkness, a void stretching infinitely in all directions. Then I saw them. Two figures emerged from the shadows. At first, I couldn't recognize them. Their faces were blurred, as if reality itself was distorting. But as they stepped closer, clarity struck me like a thunderbolt. One was a woman, dressed in royal garments, her presence commanding yet solemn. The other was a man, dressed in white robes with piercing eyes that seemed to hold centuries of knowledge. I knew who they were: Queen Elizabeth II, Pope John Paul II. But why? Why were they here, in this place between life and death? Before I could even process the thought, the Queen spoke. Her voice was calm, yet filled with something I couldn't quite place: urgency. "You shouldn't be here yet," she said, "but since you are, there's something you must know." The Pope stepped forward, his expression serious, almost sorrowful. "There is a truth," he said, "a truth that has been hidden from the world for centuries, and once you know it, you can never go back." The space around me began to shift, like the very fabric of reality was unraveling. "What truth?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The Queen and the Pope exchanged glances, and then, with a voice that sent chills down my spine, the Pope spoke. "The world is not what you think it is, and soon, everyone will know." Before I could ask anything else, the darkness began to close in. Something was pulling me back. I fought against it, desperate to hear more, but it was too late. My vision blurred, the shadows swallowed me whole, and then I woke up. Gasping for air, I found myself back in my body, surrounded by people staring at me in shock. I had returned. But I wasn't the same, because now I knew something I was never meant to know. I was back, but something was wrong. I could still hear their voices echoing in my mind. The Queen, the Pope. Their words felt burned into my soul. There is a truth that has been hidden from the world for centuries. But what truth? What was so important that two of the most powerful figures in history appeared to tell me? I tried to sit up, my heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. The people around me were speaking, but their voices seemed distant, muffled, like I was underwater. My hands were shaking. My body was drenched in sweat. I should have felt relieved to be alive, but instead I was terrified, because I knew something was different now. I wasn't supposed to be back. I tried to speak, to tell someone, anyone, what I had seen, but as soon as I opened my mouth, a sharp pain shot through my head, like someone was driving a dagger into my skull. A whisper, almost inaudible, crept into my mind. "You must not speak of this," I gasped, clutching my head. It wasn't just pain, it was something else, something unnatural. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, standing in the doorway of the hospital room, watching me. Dressed in black, his face obscured by the dim lighting, but I could feel it, the weight of his gaze, the coldness radiating from his presence. And just like that, he was gone. A shiver ran down my spine. Something was very, very wrong. I needed answers. As soon as I was discharged from the hospital, I began my search. I spent days reading, researching, trying to understand what had happened. But no matter where I looked, I kept running into dead ends. Then one night I found something, a document, an old forgotten manuscript buried deep in the Vatican archives, scanned and uploaded onto a hidden server. It was written in Latin, dated centuries ago, and at the top, one name stood out, Prophet Malachi. I had heard of him before, a 12th century Irish saint who claimed to have had a vision of all the future popes, right up until the end of times. And according to his prophecy, Pope John Paul II played a key role in the final days. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. There was another section, one that had been erased from most history books. It spoke of a covenant, a secret agreement between the rulers of the earth and a hidden force. And among the names listed in the document, Queen Elizabeth. My blood ran cold. Was this the truth they were trying to warn me about? Before I could process what I was reading, my screen suddenly went black. A message appeared. "You are being watched." Panic surged through me. I wasn't just uncovering history. I was getting too close to something they didn't want me to know. I shut the laptop and stepped away from the desk, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't just some old document. This was a warning. I turned to look around the room, suddenly aware of every shadow, every creaking sound in the walls. Was someone watching me? Had I already gone too far? The words from the vision echoed in my mind. The Queen, the Pope. You must know the truth. I needed answers, and I knew where to find them. I booked the next flight to London. The entire trip, I could feel it, that sinking weight in my stomach, the feeling that I was being followed. But every time I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe not. By the time I arrived, the city felt different, colder. The air itself seemed heavier, like an invisible force was pressing down on me. I took a taxi straight to Windsor Castle. The driver barely spoke a word, his eyes fixed on the road like he knew something I didn't. When I stepped out, the castle loomed above me, ancient and imposing. It had stood for centuries, a silent witness to the secrets of the world. And somewhere inside I knew was the truth. I walked the perimeter looking for a way in. Tourists bustled about, taking pictures, laughing, completely unaware. But as I moved around the side of the castle, something caught my eye. A man, dressed in black, standing perfectly still in the shadows, watching me. The same figure from the hospital. My blood turned to ice. I took a step back, ready to turn and leave, but then he nodded, just once, and then he disappeared. I don't know why I followed. Every rational thought in my mind screamed at me to run the other way, but something deeper, something primal, pushed me forward. Around the corner, an unmarked door stood slightly ajar. It wasn't meant to be open. I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, the scent of old paper and something metallic lingering in the air. The corridor was narrow, dimly lit, leading downward. I hesitated. Then, from deep within the passage, I heard it. A voice, soft, almost a whisper. He who seeks the truth must be prepared for the burden it carries. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't alone. I stepped deeper into the corridor, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The walls were lined with ancient stone, cold and damp beneath my fingertips. The whisper I had heard was gone now, swallowed by an eerie silence. Every instinct told me to turn back. But I had come too far. As I moved forward, the dim light flickered, casting long shadows across the narrow passage. A heavy wooden door stood at the end, slightly open. I hesitated for only a moment before pushing it wider. Inside, the room was filled with books, parchments stacked high on wooden tables, their edges curled with age. The air smelled of ink and time itself, a place untouched by the modern world. And then I saw him. An old man sat in the center of the room, his frail hands resting on an open book. His robes were deep crimson edged with gold. Not a priest, not a scholar, a guardian. He looked up, his piercing eyes locking onto mine. There was no surprise in his gaze. It was as if he had been expecting me. "You are not the first to come here," he said. His voice was calm, but heavy with something I couldn't quite define. I swallowed hard. I need to know the truth." He sighed, closing the book before him. The cover was old, worn, embossed with a golden emblem I didn't recognize. "They told you, didn't they?" he murmured. I stiffened. "The Queen, the Pope, they—" He raised a hand, stopping me. "Say no more. If they have shown themselves to you, it means time is running out." My breath hitched. "What did they mean?" I demanded. "What is this all about?" He gestured to the seat across from him. "If you truly wish to know, then listen carefully." I sat, my hands gripping the edges of the chair. "The world you know," he began, "is built upon a foundation of carefully constructed lies. And at the heart of it all lies a secret that has been guarded for centuries." The room seemed to darken as he spoke. "There was an agreement," he continued, "a pact between two of the most powerful forces on this earth. The monarchy and the church." My pulse quickened. "A covenant was made," he said. "One that ensured their survival, but at a great cost." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "A deal with something not of this world." A chill ran down my spine. My mind raced, grasping for meaning, for logic. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't just about politics or power. This was something far, far darker. The old man's eyes bore into mine, searching, as if trying to measure whether I could handle what he was about to say. I wasn't sure if I could, but it was too late to turn back. "They called it the Eternal Covenant," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was signed in secrecy centuries ago, a pact between the rulers of the earthly realm. And something else." I felt a weight settle over me, an invisible pressure tightening around my chest. "What do you mean, something else?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. The old man exhaled slowly. "Not all who walk among us are as they seem. There are those who hold power, who wear crowns and robes, who lead nations and faiths, but the source of their authority is not human." A cold shiver crawled down my spine. "The Queen," I murmured. "The Pope." He nodded. "They were not the ones who made the pact. They were born into it, sworn to protect the secret, bound to the will of those who came before them." I gripped the table, my knuckles turning white. "But why? What is the purpose of this covenant?" He leaned closer, his voice low and urgent. "To maintain control, to ensure that humanity remains blind to the truth." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thick with something unspoken. "What truth?" I whispered. The old man hesitated, then spoke the words that would haunt me forever. "That this world is not ruled by men." Silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating. My mind rebelled against the idea. It was impossible. And yet, deep down, something in me knew he was telling the truth. I thought back to my experience. The vision, the warnings, the way the Queen and the Pope had spoken, not as rulers, but as prisoners of something greater. "They tried to warn me," I muttered. The old man nodded solemnly. "Because they knew their time was ending. And when their time ends, the next phase begins." I swallowed hard. "What next phase?" He turned his gaze downward, to the ancient book still resting on the table. Slowly he opened it to a specific page. My blood ran cold as I read. The words, a prophecy, marked with a date. And that date was now. I couldn't breathe. The prophecy was written in a language I didn't fully understand, but the numbers were clear. The date wasn't for some distant future. It was now. "The eternal covenant, when it's about to be fulfilled," the old man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And when it happens, everything we know will change." I shook my head. "No, there has to be a way to stop this." He studied me for a moment, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. "Pity. Fear. There was a time when I believed that too," he said, "but the cycle has been set in motion for centuries. Every ruler, every leader who has taken the oath, they have all played their part." The words of the Queen echoed in my mind. "There is something you must know. The Pope's warning. Once you know it, you can never go back." I ran a trembling hand through my hair. "Then why tell me? Why did they show me this?" The old man's expression darkened. Because you were never supposed to return. A cold chill wrapped around my spine. What? He closed the book gently, his fingers tracing its ancient cover. Those who glimpse the truth rarely survive long enough to share it. I felt the weight of his words settle in my chest. The whispers, the shadowed figure watching me, the warning on my computer screen. They knew. They had been watching since the moment I came back. Panic surged through me. I have to get out of here. The old man gave a solemn nod. You, too, but it won't be easy. I stood, my legs unsteady beneath me. I needed to get away, far away, but then a sound. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming from the corridor outside. The old man's face turned grim. They're here. I turned to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. The handle turned, and then the door burst open. The door burst open with a force that sent dust swirling into the air. My heart stopped. Two figures stepped inside, dressed in black. Their faces were obscured, but I didn't need to see them to know they were the ones who had been watching me. The old man remained seated, his expression calm, as if he had expected this. You shouldn't have come here, one of the men said, his voice flat, emotionless. I took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. The only way out was blocked. You don't understand, I said, my voice shaking. I didn't ask for this. You were shown something you were never meant to see, the second figure interrupted. And now we have a problem. A cold sweat broke over my skin. This was it. They were going to make me disappear, just like all the others who had gotten too close to the truth. The old man exhaled slowly and turned to me. Remember what you read, he said. The prophecy was not a warning. It was a choice. The men in black moved closer. My mind raced. A choice? What did he mean? Then everything happened at once. The candlelight flickered violently. The air in the room grew heavy. And then the shadows moved. Not the men, not the old man, but the shadows themselves. They stretched, twisting unnaturally, rising from the ground like living smoke. The temperature dropped, and suddenly I knew. This was never just about the monarchy, never just about the Vatican. Something else had been pulling the strings all along. The men in black hesitated for the first time. One of them turned to run, too late. The shadows swallowed him whole. A scream echoed through the chamber, then silence. The other man collapsed to his knees, whispering something under his breath. A prayer? A plea? The old man stood, his face solemn. The Covenant is calling them back. I watched in horror as the remaining figure was dragged into the darkness. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, filled with something I couldn't define. Fear? Recognition? Then he was gone. The room was silent once more. I turned to the old man, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What just happened? He closed his eyes. It has begun. The ground trembled beneath my feet. I stumbled back, my head spinning. My entire world had just shattered. They told you for a reason, the old man said, because the cycle is ending, and now you have a role to play. I shook my head. No, I can't. You already have, he said simply. A distant bell rang, its sound deep and ominous, vibrating in my bones. I looked to the doorway. The shadows were retreating, but I knew they weren't gone. Not really. Something had awakened, and the world would never be the same again.